The Pokemon TCG's expanded format has had a varied reputation, from facilitating exciting and unique interactions to downright degeneracy. Occasionally, the Pokemon Company was forced to step in and ban cards that prevent overpowered or game-breaking decks from flooding the competitive environment. This is the 5th and final installment in our series covering the history of every banned card in the expanded format. Today we'll be exploring the history of the mascots from Expanded's most powerful control decks, and closing out with the most powerful consistency cards in the modern era of the game. First up, let's go with Sableye. Sableye was released in May of 2012's Dark Explorers expansion. For 1 Darkness Energy, it can use its Junk Hunt attack to put 2 item cards from your discard pile into your hand. At the time of its release, 2 of the strongest item cards Sableye could recycle were the Energy Disruption cards Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer. Crushing Hammer allows you to flip a coin. If heads, discard an energy card attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Recycling a card has effectively been a strong strategy since the days of Minun and Energy Removal 2 in the Ruby and Sapphire era. But unlike Minun's pickup attack, Sableye's Junk Hunt could recycle multiple Crushing Hammers at the same time, allowing to discard 1 energy per turn on average. If your opponent had any special energy in play, it could do even better. Enhanced Hammer allows you to discard a special energy card attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon with no flips required. Despite the improvement over an already successful strategy, Sableye didn't see much play initially. The standard format was much faster and less forgiving at the start of the Black and White era. Darkrai-EX released in the same set as Sableye and immediately became one of the best attackers in the game. For 2 Dark Energy and a colorless, Darkrai's Night Spear does 90 damage and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. The attack already one-hit KO'd all Pokemon EX in the format, but could be made even more powerful with the tool card Dark Claw, which makes the attacks that Dark-type Pokemon is attached to deal 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This could counteract the effect of the popular tool card Eviolite, which reduces all damage done to the basic Pokemon it's attached to by 20. If that weren't enough, Darkrai-EX's Dark Cloak ability gives all of your Pokemon with the Darkness energy attached to it no retreat cost, allowing you to easily pivot Pokemon, like a damaged Darkrai, in and out of the active spot. Darkrai was also printed alongside the item card Dark Patch, which allows you to attach a Darkness energy from discard pile to one of your bench Dark-type Pokemon. Dark Patch decreased the number of turns it would take to power up a Darkrai, incentivizing decks to chain Night Spears as aggressively as possible. Darkrai-EX decks were usually built around using Call of Legend Smeargle to set up rapidly. Once during your turn, if Smeargle is in your active Pokemon spot, you can use its Portrait Pokebody to look at your opponent's hand. If you do, choose a supporter card you find there and use the effect of that card as the effect of Portrait. Portrait could copy powerful supporter cards like Professor Juniper, In, and Professor Oak's New Theory, which could even allow Darkrai-EX to pull off a Night Spear on the first turn of the game through the use of multiple Dark Patch. This was especially terrifying considering that during the Black and White era, there were no restrictions on the player going first. You could attack immediately. Sableye was far too slow to compete in that metagame, but after the 2012 World Championships, the annual standard format rotation eliminated Smeargle from the card pool, giving Sableye its first opportunity to shine. Players began filling the void left by Smeargle's absence with multiple copies of Sableye. Darkrai decks had often spent the first couple of turns of the game using Junk Hunt to recover Dark Patch as they powered up their attackers. In 2013, the Plasma Storm expansion brought a new combination of cards that would become commonplace in all decks featuring Sableye for years to come: Hypnotoxic Laser and Verbank City Gym. As the name suggests, Hypnotoxic Laser poisons your opponent's active Pokemon and makes you flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is also asleep. Normally this would result in 10 damage from poison between turns every turn, but if the Stadium Verbank City Gym was in play, poison Pokemon would receive an additional 2 damage counters from poison between turns for a total of 30 damage. If taking 30 damage from an item card wasn't enough, a 25% chance for Hypnotoxic Laser to keep your opponent's active Pokemon asleep between turns, which is a condition that makes it so Pokemon can't attack or retreat until they flip a heads on a coin toss between turns, it was a headache for all players to deal with, especially against a Sableye that could reuse them. Many decks include the combination of Keldeo-EX and Floatstone to deal with Hypnotoxic Laser. Once during your turn, if Keldeo-EX is on your bench, you can use its Rush In ability to swap in with your active Pokemon. Then Keldeo-EX can retreat for free into any Pokemon you wanted using the tool card Floatstone, which gives the Pokemon it's attached to no retreat cost, or by using Darkai's EX Dark Cloak ability if you had a Darkness energy attached. A poisoned and potentially asleep Pokemon could be swapped in and out of the active spot with the use of Keldeo-EX in order to remove all of its special conditions. Early control-oriented Sableye decks started to pop up around this time as well. The first Garbotoxin Garbodor was released during the 2013 season, which became an immediate partner for Sableye. Its disruptive Garbotoxin ability, which removes the abilities of all Pokemon in play except for Garbotoxin as long as it has a Pokemon tool card attached, shuts off Keldeo-EX's Rush In as well as Pokemon that would normally accelerate energy into play and cause problems for Sableye's disruption from Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer. Combined with Hypnotoxic Laser's damage output with Darkrai-EX as a cleanup attacker when all of your opponent's resources were depleted, almost everything was in place for Sableye to succeed. But it took one final piece to push the archetype over the edge: the Ace-Spec tool card, Life Dew. You can only include one Ace-Spec card in your deck. When the Pokemon Life Dew is attached to is knocked out, your opponent takes one fewer prize card. When attached to Sableye, your opponent would take no prize cards for knocking it out. After a Sableye with Life Dew was knocked out, Junk Hut could recycle Life Dew, then you could reattach it to a new Sableye during the next turn. This effectively meant every other Sableye gave up no prize cards when it was knocked out. The item card Tool Scrapper was an effective counter to the strategy, as it could be used to discard Life Dew and a tool card from Garbodor reactivated abilities. But as long as your opponent wasn't playing multiple Tool Scrappers, Sableye decks were more than capable of dealing with the single setback. The Rogue Sableye Garbodor archetype was able to take its first major placement at the 2013 World Championships when it was piloted to a 4th place finish, proving it was a powerful contender in the metagame. A few years would pass with Sableye filling similar roles in the metagame as both the focus of control decks and as a support Pokemon paired with new powerful Dark-type attackers. But things would change for Sableye after the release of the number 14's Phantom Forces expansion, when it got access to the reprint of Versus Seeker. Versus Seeker is an item card that allows you to put a supporter card from your discard pile into your hand. Suddenly, Sableye had access to recycling any supporter card it wanted by taking Versus Seeker off of its Junk Hunt attack. Sableye deck started to recycle Getseas in order to strip an opponent's hand of resources. Getseas is a supporter card which forces your opponent to reveal their hand, then has them shuffle all item cards from their hand into their deck. Then you draw a card for each item card that was shuffled into their deck. Getseas is now banned in the expanded format, and you can find out why in our previous ban list episode on disruption cards. Sableye could also make use of Team Flare Grunt, a supporter card that allows you to discard an energy card attached to your opponent's active Pokemon, or Zurasic, a supporter card that allows you to discard a special energy or tool card in play for guaranteed energy removal. The Team Flare tool card Headringer also released in the Phantom Forces expansion. Headringer can be attached to your opponent's Pokemon EX and increases the cost of their attacks by 1 colorless energy. However, one card released in the prior expansion, Furious Fist, would prove to be too much of a hurdle for Sableye to overcome, the infamous Seismitoad-EX. For 2 colorless energy, Seismitoad-EX's Quaking Punch does 30 damage and prevents your Pokemon from playing any item cards during their next turn. As Sableye recovered exclusively item cards, this attack was crippling to its strategy. While initially underrated, Seismitoad-EX became increasingly popular as players realized that the combination of Muscle Band, a tool card which makes the attacks of Pokemon it's attached to do 20 additional damage, and Hypnotoxic Laser with Verbank City Gym supplemented Seismitoad-EX's low damage output enough to make it a top-tier threat. In the same set Sableye decks gain access to Versus Seeker, Seismitoad-EX decks has received a new partner, Slurpuff, which could allow players to cycle through their decks to find all those damage modifiers at a quicker pace through the use of its tasting ability. Once during your turn, you may use Slurpuff's tasting to draw a card. If Slurpuff was your active Pokemon, draw 2 cards instead. With up to 4 Slurpuff in play at once, Seismitoad-EX decks were able to draw a ton of additional cards per turn, allowing them to forego a normal draw supporter every couple turns in favor of one of the disruptive supporter cards mentioned earlier, or the incredible powerful Lysandra's Trump card we discussed in our first ban list episode. Lysandra's Trump card forces each player to shuffle their entire discard pile into their deck except for any other Lysandra Trump cards. Seismitoad decks use it to recover all their damage modifiers and energy disruption cards that had been used earlier in the game, but it also had the side effect of countering Sableye's strategy of storing useful items and supporter cards in the discard pile, so Junk Hut could recycle them when necessary. While Seismitoad decks were nerfed by Lysandra Trump cards banned in May of 2015, Seismitoad-EX still stayed a formidable attacker, and the threat of an item lock wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. The combination of Vileplume with the irritating pollen ability, which prevents either player from playing any item cards as long as it was in play, as well as Forest of Giant Plants, which could allow an Oddish to evolve all the way up into Vileplume on the first turn of the game, were printed around this time as well. Later on in the X and X era, the item locking Trevenant with its Forest Curse ability prevented opponents from playing any item cards as long as it was active, would receive a buff to its damage and the output of Trevenant Break, which made it an even more prevalent threat than before. Combined with the supporter card Wally, Trevenant could also start item locking on the first turn of the game. The Sableye Garbodor archetype couldn't exist with all these forms of item locking dominating the format, so it was forced to wait out until its popularity waned. In the meantime, Sableye's toolbox of options continued to grow. Trick Shovel, an item card which allows you to look at the top card of either player's deck, then choose to either return that card to the top of its owner's deck or discard it, allowing Sableye decks to win by deck out more quickly. This stadium card, Team Aqua's Secret Base, increases the retreat cost of all Pokemon in play, excluding Team Aqua Pokemon by 1 colorless energy. Combined with the item card Target Whistle, which allows you to put a Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile into their bench, and the supporter card Lysandra, which allows you to switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon, Sableye could make use of Team Aqua's Secret Base to trap Pokemon that had costly or unusable attacks in the active spot, while they removed energy from their opponent's benched attackers. The item card Captivating Pokepuff released a couple of years later, making the trapping strategy much more difficult to play around. It has the same effect as Target Whistle, except you get to put the Pokemon from your opponent's hand onto their bench instead of their discard pile. Sableye decks also gained a Hex Maniac, a supporter card which removes the abilities of all Pokemon in play until the end of your opponent's next turn. It can be used to turn off item locking abilities of Trevenant and Vileplume long enough to attach a tool card to Garbodor, shutting off their abilities indefinitely. But the most impactful new card Sableye gained during its hiatus from the metagame came in the Breakpoint expansion. Delinquent is a supporter card which allows you to discard a stadium card from play. If you do, your opponent has to discard 3 cards from their hand. If your opponent ever had 3 or fewer cards in their hand, Delinquent could just remove them all. And then by playing multiple trick shovels repeatedly, Sableye decks could lock their opponent out of drawing useful cards for many turns in a row. But by far, the most powerful card Sableye gained from the breakpoint was the item card Puzzle of Time. You can play 2 Puzzle of Time at once. If you played 1, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and then put them back in any order. If you played 2, put any 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. The first effect of Puzzle of Time could bail you out of a dead hand, but its second effect was extremely powerful paired with Sableye. Each turn, Junk Hut could recover 2 Puzzle of Time, which not only gave Sableye access to any card in the discard pile, let it recover cards like Team Aqua's Secret Base, but also allowed players to decide on which cards they wanted to recover after an opponent had taken their turn. Previously, you would have to decide which cards to recover with Junk Hunt before you knew what your opponent was going to do, and making the wrong decision could cost the game. But Puzzle of Time eliminated the need to make those predictions at all. Most importantly, it allowed Sableye decks to immediately recover a life dew that had been used to deny a prize card from your opponent in order to play it back down on the new Sableye right away. These cards were enough to put Sableye on the map again, but it still struggled against the item block heavy metagame. Sableye saw a large increase in play during the early Sun and Moon era as Forests of Giant Plants received a ban, eliminating the threat of Vileplume. Seismitoad EX and Trevenant decks became less popular as well due to the influx of new powerful Pokemon GX that began to take over the format. However, Sableye would be hit by a few important bans shortly after the expanded metagame had been taken over by Zoroark GX as discussed in our last ban list video. Ghetsis, Delinquent, and most importantly, Puzzle of Time were banned. Sableye decks didn't rely on hand disruption as much as other control strategies, so it didn't suffer too much from the loss of Ghetsis and Delinquent, but losing Puzzle of Time limited Sableye's options severely. As consolation, Wally was also banned, making Trevenant a much easier deck to deal with. More cards continued to be released throughout the Sun and Moon era, and Sableye eventually became a top-tier threat to consider. The supporter card Team Skull Grunt bolstered Sableye's energy disruption strategies, as it allows you to look at your opponent's hand and discard up to 2 special energy from it. Another addition to the energy disruption package was Faba, which allowed you to put a special energy card or a Pokemon tool attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon, or a stadium card in play, and put it into the Lost Zone. Counter Catcher, an item card that can only be played when you have more prize cards left in your opponent, allows you to switch an opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon, improving Sableye's trapping strategies with Team Aqua's Secret Base. The supporter card Gladion could be used to take crucial life dew out of your prize cards, as it allows you to look at your prize cards and put one in your hand, then put Gladion in its place. And finally, for new trainer cards, Sableye could use the supporter card Hiker, which allows you to look at the top 5 cards of either player's deck and choose one to put on top of that player's deck and shuffle the other cards back. Hiker could be combined with Trick Shovel to discard crucial resources or lock your opponent out of the game if they got stuck with a dead hand. There were more Pokemon that joined the roster of control cards at this time as well. Girafaridge's Get Lost attack for 1 colorless energy puts 2 cards from your opponent's discard pile into the Lost Zone. Opponents who planned on recovering resources, such as supporter cards through the use of Versus Seeker, were now at risk at having the option stripped away from them at any time. Girafaridge was especially powerful in control mirrors, where Get Lost acted as a perfect counter to Sableye's Junk Hunt. Articuno GX offered another powerful energy disruption effect. Its ability, Legendary Ascent, allowed it to switch into the active spot when you played it from your hand onto your bench, and gave you the option to move any number of water energy attached to the Pokemon to it. But the once per game Cold Crush GX was the selling point of the card. The attack discarded all energy from itself and your opponent's active Pokemon, but by far the most important control-oriented Pokemon of the era served as a competition to Sableye, Oranguru, from the Ultra Prism expansion. For 1 colorless energy, Oranguru's Resource Management attack allows you to put any 3 cards from your discard pile into the bottom of your deck. Oranguru was most commonly paired with Pidgeot from the Team Up expansion for its Airmail ability. Once during your turn, Airmail allows you to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand. Then put the other card on the bottom of your deck. By setting up multiple Pidgeot, Oranguru focused control decks are able to reach the bottom of their decks quickly in order to get access to resource from Resource Management, which outpaced Sableye's Junk Hunt at low deck sizes. Oranguru saw a significant amount of play in the standard format alongside Pokemon like Shedinja. During your turn, you can attach a Shedinja to one of your Pokemon as a tool card, which has the same effects as Life Dew. Oranguru could recycle supporter cards like Beleba and Bryson Man, which discards the top 3 cards of each player's decks. When you play Beleba and Bryson Man, you may also choose to discard 3 cards from your hand in order to have both players discard bench Pokemon until they have 3 remaining. Combined with the supporter card Lieutenant Surge's strategy, which you can play when you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent in order to play a total of 3 supporter cards in the turn, including Lieutenant Surge's strategy, you could discard 6 cards from the top of your opponent's deck each turn. Then you finish off the game with a Burning Magma GX attack from Mad Cargo GX, which allows you to discard the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck for only 1 fire energy. Sableye stayed dominant over Oranguru in the expanded format until the release of an item card called Lily's Pokédoll from the Cosmic Eclipse expansion. You can play Lily's Pokédoll on your bench as a Pokemon with 30 HP. At any time during your turn, if Lily's Pokédoll is your active Pokemon, you can put it on the bottom of your deck. Crucially, when Lily's Pokédoll is knocked out, it gives up 0 prize cards. If dealing with Lily's Pokédoll, which could be recycled by Junk Hunt or Resource Management, wasn't enough, players combine it with similar item cards Robo Substitute, which had been released 5 years prior. Robo Substitute can also be put on your bench as a Pokemon with 30 HP, and it also gives up 0 prize cards when it's knocked out. The only difference is that it can be discarded from anywhere in play instead of being put on the bottom of your deck only from the active spot. The same Cosmic Eclipse expansion that Lily's Pokédoll is released in also include the item card Alana's Fishing Rod, which allows you to shuffle a Pokemon and a Pokemon tool card from your discard pile into your deck, finally acting as a suitable replacement for the life-dew looping strategy puzzle Time had enabled years prior. Players included another annoying wall card like Snorlax from the Plasma Storm expansion, with its block ability preventing your opponent's Pokemon from retreating while it was active, and played all of the disruption cards mentioned throughout this video to wait until your opponent drew through their entire deck and lost a deck out. Sableye and Oranguru joined together as the enablers of this Doll Stall archetype. After narrowly escaping bans for years, Sableye and Oranguru were added to the ban list in October of 2020. In the Pokemon Company's own words, Oranguru's Resource Management attack and Sableye's Junk Hunt attack allowed for infinite resource recursion strategies that are relatively simple to achieve. In an attempt to curb the effectiveness of some of these control lock strategies, these cards have been banned. If you've been following the ban list series up to now, you may have noticed one card popping up over and over again as a supporter for almost every broken combo in the Expanded's history. It's not Zoroark GX as you might think. That card is certainly responsible for pushing many cards over the edge, but even in its many exploits, it wouldn't have been possible with the help of the most powerful consistency card in the modern era of the game, Shaymin-EX. When you play Shaymin-EX from your hand onto your bench, you may use its setup ability to draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. Unlike the more recent Crobat V's Dark Acid ability, setup was not restricted to being used once per turn, which allowed decks to draw an absurd amount of cards in the first turn of the game, pulling off massive combos with ease. If setup wasn't enough, Shaymin-EX also had an incredibly useful attack, Sky Return. For 2 colorless energy, Sky Return did 30 damage and put Shaymin-EX and all cards attached to it into your hand, allowing you to reuse setup on your next turn. If you had a dead hand, one Sky Return could ensure you drew out of it. Or if Shaymin-EX's measly 110 HP on a Pokemon EX, which gave up 2 prize cards, was too much of a liability, you could remove it from play permanently before your opponent could take advantage of it. Shaymin-EX first caused the ban of supporter card Lysandra's Trump card when it was paired with Seismitoad EX, which we covered in the first ban list episode. While Lysandra's Trump card was already exceptionally powerful, forcing both players to shuffle their entire discard piles back into their deck, Shaymin-EX allowed players to cycle through their deck repeatedly by reusing setup thanks to Super Scoop Up, an item card which allows you to flip a coin, and if heads, put one of your Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your hand. The next 3 bans covered in our first episode were also due in part to Shaymin-EX. Setup ensured Vileplume could consistently be put into play on turn 1 thanks to Forest of Giant Plants, locking your opponent out of item cards. It also allowed players to find Wally on turn 1 to evolve into Trevenant immediately, which also shut off item cards. Shaymin-EX saw to it that the supporter card Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick was able to get Archeops into play on turn 1, shutting your opponent out of evolutions for the entire game. The combo of Red Card, Delinquent, and Peeking Red Card covered in the second ban list episode, which removes almost your opponent's entire hand as early as turn 1, wouldn't have been possible without Shaymin-EX's consistency. In the third ban list episode, we explore the Island Challenge Amulet combo featuring Jirachi EX, Hoopa GX, Miss Magius, Lieutenant Surge's Strategy, In, and Mars, as well as the Trevenant and Dusknoir GX's archetype with the Energy Grace Milotic. Neither of these strategies would have been consistent, or in the former's case, even realistic without Shaymin-EX's setup. Finally, the Unknown Damage combo based around Reuniclus, Team Magma's Secret Base, Klefki, and Weevil and Masquerena, discussed in the fourth ban list episode, may never have been consistent enough to warrant ban without Shaymin-EX. But the consistency Shaymin-EX offered these strategies was nothing compared to what it could do following the release of the Rebel Clash expansion in May of 2020. Scoop Up Net is an item card from Rebel Clash, which allows you to choose one of your Pokemon in play, excluding Pokemon GX and Pokemon V. Discard all cards attached to that Pokemon, and put it into your hand. Despite the fact that Scoop Up Net couldn't target Pokemon GX and Pokemon V, it was still allowed to pick up Pokemon EX, like Shaymin. Most cards in the Pokemon TCG are designed with the standard format in mind first, and all Pokemon EX had rotated out of the format by the time, so the game designers did include that critical exclusion. With 4 Scoop Up Net, Shaymin-EX could be reused 4 additional times without ever taking up more bench space. While no official events were happening at the time due to the pandemic, the latter in the online Pokemon TCG clients started to be infested by turn 1 win decks based around Latios EX and Fast Rate attack. For 1 Psychic Energy, Fast Rate only does 40 damage, but the attack can be used on your first turn even if you went first. Combined with 4 plus power, an item card which makes the attacker Pokemon do 10 more damage for the rest of the turn, the tool card Muscle Band, which makes the attacks of the Pokemon it's attached to do 20 more damage, the basic Pokemon Galarian Zigzagoon, which can use its Headbutt Tantrum ability while you play it from your hand onto your bench, putting 1 damage counter into one of your opponent's Pokemon, and many damage modifier cards, Players would draw their entire deck on their first turn of the game in an attempt to knock out all of your opponent's Pokemon in play before they ever got to have their first turn. While this fast rate donk deck likely would have never been a top tier competitive deck due to its reliance on going first, it was a clear showcase of Shaymin-EX's dominating consistency when paired with Scoop Up Net. There were alternative similar abilities to Shaymin-EX in the form of Dendene's Dende Change, which allows you to discard your hand and draw 6 cards when you played it from your hand onto your bench, or the aforementioned Crobat V's Dark Acid ability, but both of these were limited to being used once per turn overall. You can't use more than one Dende Change or Dark Acid ability in a turn. Despite the lack of in-person events and official tournaments in the expanded format, the Pokémon Company finally decided to issue Shaymin-EX a ban. In their words, the sheer amount of card drawing provided by Shaymin-EX's setup ability allowed dangerous combo decks to function at an alarmingly consistent rate. With the introduction of Scoop Up Net, it became too easy to use setup repeatedly in a single turn. Crobat V and Dendene GX provided effects similar to Shaymin-EX, so this type of card isn't gone completely, but their Dark Asset and Dende Change abilities are limited to once per turn. As a result, Shaymin-EX's interaction with Scoop Up Net, all Pokemon EX, GX, V, and similar mechanics are categorized as Pokemon that have a rule box, and effects which are designed to exclude them all use that wording. And that's it for this final installment on the history of every banned card in the expanded format as of 2022. Look out for any future parts of this series whenever there's a new update to the ban list. And as always, if you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one, please let us know down in the comments.